And I find myself drifting away as the listener is drifting away now from what we're doing.
Come on back. Get back here.
Because I'm talking too much. Hello and welcome to episode 314 of the Rockstar CMO effing Marketing Podcast, a proud member of the Marketing Podcast Network. It's Saturday, March the 21st. I'm your host, Ian Truscott. I'm not a rock star, but I am a B2B CMO and now managing partner at Velocity B. This week, our weekly dose of marketing street knowledge comes from my chum, Jeff Clark, who shares his 5 effing tips for marketers navigating the enshitication of social media. Before I grab a stool in our virtual bar, the Rose Rockstar, to pick the brains of our master of marketing and mixology, Robert Rose, who's kicking ChatGPT to the curb as he's found a new LLM love. But first, we need to pay the bar tab. I'll be back in a moment.
We'll be right back after this word.
We'll be right back
After this word.
You may know you're listening to this show along the Marketing Podcast Network, but did you know there are other great shows on MPN to help your business? Heather Eck hosts an amazing show called Your Radiant Spirit. Heather, tell listeners about the show.
What if the colors you're drawn to, the creative urges you ignore, and the quiet intuitive hits you brush off are actually trying to tell you something? Your Radiant Spirit is the podcast that helps you listen and live with greater clarity and purpose.
And where can people subscribe?
You can find and subscribe at heathereck.com/yourradiantspirit, on marketingpodcast.net, or search for it wherever you get your podcasts.
You heard her. Go subscribe.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. Stop waiting around for the perfect candidate. Instead, use Indeed sponsored jobs to find the right people with the right skills fast. It's a simple way to make sure your listing is the first candidates see. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs have 4 times more applicants than non-sponsored jobs. So go build your dream team today with Indeed. Get a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
Ian, welcome to the studio. How are you doing?
I'm doing all right. Thank you very much, mate. You didn't catch me with that pause this time. I managed to remember.
I tried not to pause too long.
I'm doing good. How are you doing? Has the weather broken up there? Is it better?
It has broken, and I think we have the spring equinox coming up soon. But yes, our snow has been melted and rained away, and right now it's sunny, cold,
nice.
But it is March, so March goes in like a lion, out like a lamb, and that's what we're hoping for.
I'll take that. But yeah, we've got a beautiful sunny day here as well. So some good weather this week here in the UK. So where are we? So yes. So I actually promised this to the listeners last week because I knew what we were going to talk about today. Because we have a plan, don't we? We do plan things. And we're doing something. Say again.
I was going to say we follow our fundamentals. We do our research. We have our plan.
Execute our plan.
Operations are good. Yeah, we tell a story. Yeah.
So this week we are doing something a little bit different this week. As Jeff, you've been reading a book.
I'm always reading a book, but now I'm reading something that's relevant to what we discussed.
The book you've been reading is Enshitication: Why Everything Suddenly Got Worse and What to Do About It by Cory Doctorow, which has given this term enshitification a bit of notoriety, and it digs into how the business of social media has evolved, giving us, the consumer, a shittier experience. So have you finished it? Was it good?
Actually, no, I got into a novel in the middle of it, and so I'm probably 50 pages from the end. And I do.
You've got the plot already.
Yeah, really. And then I go over, and it's like, geez. Yeah, I do recommend the book. Because I mean, as a marketer, it's interesting just because of the technology that we're all so freaking familiar with, and but it's a good read, and lots of interesting things.
Right, we'll get to the interesting things in a minute. Because just then I was talking about the fact it gave the consumer a shitty experience. But when we were talking about doing this, an old phrase came to mind about these platforms that I think it went something like, if it's free, you're not the consumer, you are the product, in that these platforms offer a utility for our data. And it seems from what, I mean, I haven't read the book, but I did look at a bunch of videos and what this guy was talking about. And it seems this utility is degrading as they seek to make a profit out of us, and we are the product. And I think we could do a whole episode on that.
We could,
but
rabbit
the thing
hole.
when we were talking about covering this, I thought, well, what's the point of having that pity party? All we do is complain. And I was thinking it's like complaining about gravity. You may not like it, but it doesn't care. Instead, you are going to share 5 effing things marketers need to overcome this enshitication. What say you, Jeff?
Well, as first thing is that, for the record, I'm not going to complain about gravity. I thought that was an interesting, comment you made, but it keeps us grounded, so it's not too bad. The other thing is that I first came upon this term because I was listening to a podcast about what's going on in the economy in general, and tariffs and and so they popped this term up, and so then I Googled it, because that's what you do. And it's like, oh my gosh, here's this book. And so I read it.
Yeah.
And but as I was reading the book, part of it is, just you start thinking about your own experience, with degraded social platforms, both as the user and as a marketer. I mean, what has it been? 10, 15 years or more where, social media marketing has been a thing. And so, as you kind of dig into the book, and certainly as it applies to what we need to know about as marketers, is that all of these platforms, and he does tend to focus on the big things, big platforms like Facebook, Amazon, Google, and it's like at the beginning they really caught our imagination, and it's like wow, these are incredible, and the free benefits for our users, and the previous search platforms were they were kind of sucky. These are so good, and it's also it became a way for businesses to connect with buyers. But then little by little, they prioritized, as you noted, the real customer is the buyer of the personal data, and at the expense of us. And so there's 5.66 billion people on social media, according to the Digital Marketing Institute, which that's a big chunk of the world's population. And it just it's like one of those things where you'd say, they're out there. This is a way to engage, but a lot of these platforms, they're sort of the social engagement is down. One of the data points was that Instagram's down like 18% year over year since 2022. There's ad fatigue is set in. The audiences is tuning ads out. Users worry about data privacy. And there's constant algorithm changes, which all of us that have been involved in organic, and paid search, it's like you're following something that just is constantly on the move, and measuring success with anything other than kind of the vanity metrics like likes and shares and stuff like that becomes evasive, and so it's really something that. Rather than have the pity party, it's like I decided to dig in, some research from Digital Marketing Institute, other vendors like Avocado Social, which I actually hadn't heard before, Hootsuite, et cetera, to get into some, what's kind of advice that, we as marketers can use to overcome the channel enshitication, which is it is a hard, you got to practice saying the term because it's easy to stumble over.
Yeah, and this particular episode will be accompanied by, I think, 4 or 5 links that of that research, right? Yeah. So there's some reading to be done behind
reading
all this.
For the audience, yes.
Yeah. So and that'll obviously be in the show notes on rockstarcmo.com. But yes, but completely to your point, I mean, it's I hadn't realised that there was this year-on-year fall, and I obviously completely agree with you in terms of the fact that it seems like, I mean, you see this on LinkedIn. People are actually talking about it. They talk about LinkedIn as if it's their networking tool, and somehow LinkedIn is ruining it. It isn't. It's a tool for LinkedIn or Microsoft to make money, right?
Yeah.
That's what it's there for. It's not there for us, right? And I think that's the interesting thing there. And also for some work for Velocity B, my day job, I was looking at data for LinkedIn. There's 1.3 billion users, but only a fraction of daily active users, around 134 million, according to the data I was looking at, which is 10% of the total, and only 0.3% of the total post regularly. So I don't think even this platform, which in my opinion is the least shitty of them all, right, of all the social media platforms, I don't think it's a sure thing for marketers. So I think these tips are important. And I think also what we need to bear in mind, I think we'll talk about a bit later, is that this can't be your entire strategy, right?
Absolutely.
This is just part of your strategy, because it's not, you're building your foundations on sand, aren't you, with some of this stuff. So anyway, let's get to your tip. So let's start with, what's your first tip, mate?
Number one is have a clear strategy, which I follow by, as you can see in the show notes, because that, we constantly talk about that, but with particularly, with the issues of content fatigue and the need for buyers to find, meaningful interactions on social platforms. Your success is going to depend on focus. And, so we get a chance to beat our drum on two of our FN marketing fundamentals, which is the knowledge, so doing your research, and then the master plan. So you got to focus, on being precise about where your audience is. So who's the ideal customer profile? Where are they looking for information? Which I often call, what are their watering holes? And put your efforts there and dispense with the platforms that don't connect. So, we often talk about, the big platforms, Facebook, et cetera. And so it's like, just put those aside. If that's not where, if that is where your audience is, then that's fine. But if that's not, then just put it aside. Don't even think about it. Even though, like we talk about, and I'll have an example, like LinkedIn, we're on it. And so it seems like an easy, natural thing to connect with people on, but if that might not be where your audience is. And so like I actually, I worked at a company that had, 4 key audiences, and we were on LinkedIn, as individuals. Our partners were all on LinkedIn. So you kind of think, wow, this is a great place. And it's easy to do some really targeted advertising. But if we found out our audience wasn't there, and certainly not with any regularity, and they probably were last there when they were looking for a job, and then they decided, I don't need this anymore.
We're living it, Jeff, just to interrupt you there, mate. And that's why I was looking at this data, because we're living it in terms of, all the growth hacker bros that are on LinkedIn saying this is the playbook for working with LinkedIn. Very few of your actual ICP and your buyers are going to be there regularly, as you say, right? And so, it's not a shoo-in that just because somebody has a LinkedIn account, they're not active. So
the audiences that we were focused on, they're all big, in terms of size markets: healthcare, education, public sector. I can't remember. I think the other one was manufacturing. And it was interesting. It's like you'd think that in New England there'd be a lot of people in those, but again, they were not the type of people that engaged on LinkedIn. So you may find that your audience is on some obscure platform that's specific to an industry, and I remember when I was doing a lot of work in Europe, and Zing was like the LinkedIn for Germany. But I found out all these other ones that are, I would say untapped, but it's UNTPPD for craft breweries. So I was like, got to go subscribe there because I might find something interesting. Athlinks for athletes and sports equipment. So, some of these more smaller platforms, more targeted platforms might be what's more ideal for your business. But then as part of your plan, you've got to develop some business relevant success metrics. And you may love the likes, the shares, the comments, because, your analytics tools can pick them up. But if they're not leading to business, what's the point on reporting about them? So can you track, referrals to your website, or the conversion to identifiable contacts? Are these people in your buying groups? Can you get a kind of sense from social and web activity that these accounts are in pipeline, so they're active in their buying process? can you score opportunities based on, the sense of engagement in the buying process? And also, which I think one thing, we were familiar with back when we worked together, is that there are, you can use the social tools to understand customer interest, satisfaction, with both you and your competitors. So, I mean, this might be a rabbit hole for another podcast, but it can be like win-loss analysis, the ability to see why you're having success, why not, what's hot in messaging, etc.
Yeah, I remember those times. It was the kind of the golden age of Twitter and LinkedIn, like around 2009-10 time, wasn't it? And there was a lot you could do with customer interests and satisfaction stuff. I don't know whether it's as easy to do that now that the algorithms have changed at lockdown, but I agree. Social media is a great way to test your hypotheses about your buyers' opinions on the category, assuming, of course, to our point earlier, that they are there. And also the adjacent topics that you may not have defined as their needs, right, in your persona development. So you can see what else they're interested in, what other content might you be producing. But I completely agree, it's very dangerous to get addicted to vanity metrics, and also to assume that a cohort of your persona audience that are active on LinkedIn are representative of that persona cohort, right? It might just be, just a couple of them are, but most of them aren't, and they're the ones that you need to try and reach. And I think that and also, I mean, I worked with an organization where one of the sales guys was completely addicted to growing the size of the LinkedIn audience and stuff. But when you actually looked at the market sizing for this fairly niche product and how many buyers there were, there's a limit, right? So you need to, this needs to be, those vanity metrics quickly become irrelevant to the size of your addressable market and the people that actually make an impact on a deal or a business outcome. Because I think you get sort of like a return of, you get a rule of diminishing returns.
Yes.
Yeah, don't you? And the more people you have in your audience, the less of them are actually the people you want to speak to. But I've wanged on a bit there. What's your number 2, mate?
Provide expertise and education. So one of the issues on the social platforms is the algorithms penalize overly promotional content, and users ignore it. Now, that doesn't mean you don't do any promotion, which we'll come back to on point number 5. But the buyers are looking for information to help them making buying decisions. So, we're in B2B marketing, so let's think like the buyer. What are they looking for, in various parts of the buying cycle? Because that's the other thing about some of these social platforms, is that it's not just necessarily, they're not going to be engaged just at the beginning of a process. They may be engaged all through their buying process. So you got to be educational. Post your best advice. The content, might be dependent on the buying needs, the format, the platform of the particular platform. But, tell stories that are about your successful customers. Sometimes let your customers actually tell those stories. For example, one client of mine, we created a YouTube channel for all of our conference presentations, our customer stories, so that we could get that out there in some way that was easy to access, was off our website, and was a great resource center for buyers. Plus, we could cross-link back to our website resources, and also try to they're trying to understand, the buyer are trying to understand who can help them best. So this is obviously a place to put your brand out there. What's the impression you're trying to leave them with? Is it does it speak to your unique value proposition, and does it differentiate you from your competitors who may also be engaged on the social channel?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I was actually going to mention this before we hit record, on that educational thing. Kerry, I don't know if you saw, I commented on it or I shared it on LinkedIn. Kerry Cunningham, friend of the show or previous guest on the show. I don't know if he's the current. He's a friend of yours.
Friend and guest. Yeah.
And from Sixth Sense posted something about that educational content. And I think that might be the fact that we play this playbook and we assume everybody needs education on the category. It's a complete rabbit hole, me mentioning it now, but I wanted to mention it to you, Jeff, because I think that might be an interesting thing to look at about how educational you need to be and what the right content is in this perspective, particularly if you're in a crowded, well understood category. But also Sixth Sense is a great example of this as well, is that you need to be really generous with your content marketing, which is great advice for any channel, right? But you're right. Social media channels want to keep the user on their channel, and they're all about keeping the attention, and so they don't want people to leave, right? So that's why it seems that external links get penalized. So you need to play the game, feed the beast how it wants to be fed, and it will drive buyers to and the hope really that it drives buyers to your own platforms, because it's easy. You want to include the links, you want to track but LinkedIn's going to hate that. So work with it rather than against it, I think.
Absolutely.
Do you agree?
Feed the beast is point 2B. I love that.
Yeah. So what's your number 3, mate?
3 is nurture your community. And I know when I put this down, you raised a very valid question, is that, are we talking about building like a community platform, or are we talking about building a community on a independent third party? And it is more the latter, because on those social platforms, audiences don't necessarily trust. I shouldn't say don't necessarily. They don't trust the vendors. So you've got to use it to engage your audience and develop a following. These are by nature supposed to be conversation spaces, not places for your billboards like a magazine. But the algorithms do favor posts that generate conversation, so you can't ignore engagement. It's like you do want people to comment. You do want to respond to comments. You don't want to ignore direct messages. Sometimes you may have to follow up, off the platform if you can't follow up on the platform. You need to address criticisms. Don't delete them. You need to counter them. And you also, which I found was interesting, is you need to do things quickly, because algorithms face posts that have early performance. So, you put a video up there on YouTube, and it's about cybersecurity, and nobody talks, nobody comments for 6 months, and then all of a sudden there's some discussion. It's like, well, that's not really helping you. And it's interesting. I did have a client that was an IT managed services company, and they only had a small number of Google reviews, but one was negative, and we were like, well, we don't even know who this guy is. We determined that actually he was a friend of another client who had a bad experience. And so he chose to badmouth us on Google. So you had to address that comment online, and then double down our efforts to get customers who had positive experiences to do Google reviews. And it's, again, and it was one of the things where, with this company, I was like, we got to address this. And they're like, it's who was this guy? And I'm like, well, it's just sitting out there.
Yeah. Well, I think, there's a couple of things on that, isn't there? One of the things is, I think that I read some research that consumers actually don't trust 5 out of 5 5-star consumer reviews, right? Because it just doesn't, it seems fake. And also nowadays you have so much fake content around comments, reviews and stuff like that. So you really got to pay attention to that. And I completely agree that if you're facing some kind of criticism or comment, you've got to deal with it. But also to your point as well, completely agree. I mean, that was the research that I'm seeing, that actually comments on posts are very valued by the algorithm, right? And so you need to make sure that you're joining that conversation to your own posts and to other people's posts, so you keep that going. So those are good points. And what also struck me about this community point is we were talking about the same thing a couple of decades ago with online forums and stuff, right? Which is similar. I don't know if any of your research took you to Reddit, but for example, with Reddit, the communities there are very sensitive to selling. So you need to be helpful and be respected as part of the community before they're going to let you in. And it was exactly the same 2 decades ago, because I recall an AV online community in the UK, which was, complete bunch of geeks. You can imagine these AV people are. So they're very sensitive to anyone selling. But a small chain of AV equipment stores, back then, there's a little case study on it, had someone in the community simply helping with questions, which then built the reputation of that that store and as being part of the community. So if you were part of that community, they were your go-to supplier because they were like you know, you're one of them. They weren't some just high street big box shifting kit. They actually cared about the community, and that actually was a great channel for them for sales. So it's almost going back to the old schools, right, of those communities, of those online communities that you've got to do that, particularly with Reddit.
The more things change, the more they stay the same.
Yeah. So that was number 3. Sometime earlier we were talking about nurture your community. So what's number 4?
Tell stories that engage and entertain. And so, you know, I mean, we often talk about this story. I mean, that's one of the 5 fundamentals of marketing is tell stories. And you know, with declining organic reach, you know, you're in a big battle for eyeballs. So, you know, if you want your expertise and education to stick, you know, ensure you're telling it in a compelling way. And you know, the platforms are favoring individual creators over corporate accounts. You know, so this is where your company's influencers or even your partner's influencers come into play. You know, we've talked before about having your executive be out there, you know, speaking and writing and helping to be a face of your organization. So posting on social media is, you know, should be part of the gig. And of course, you got to help them, you know, do that to avoid PR issues like we have with our president here in the United States. You know, but I do, you know, I know, you know, CEOs, CTOs, CMOs, even sales leaders, you know, who have been very active socially, and they, you know, they help identify trends. They talk about customer successes. They address, you know, customer concerns. So I think it's a valuable resource to make sure they, as opposed to, you know, a corporate account is doing some of this work. Yeah, and what may seem obvious is that, you know, the content has to suit the platform. So, you know, short video on TikTok, expertise and industry insights on LinkedIn, educational videos on YouTube, you know, and as you get into more targeted channels, obscure channels, then, you know, you got to observe how's the community behave and what's the type of way that they want to be engaged with you.
Yeah, and I think also to your previous point about community, we can also help drive and facilitate that last point, right, that you're making there, is when you're talking about obscure channels, we can own some of that, those smaller rooms, as it were, right? And then but it is all back to what we were talking about just now. These platforms want your attention, and us providing content that will keep the audience engaged. And indeed, entertainment is often underrated as part of that. It's not always about education. It's certainly not about promotion, as you say, right? Is going to help the social media channel, which will then help us, right? So you're going with the flow of feeding the beast. And I also find this with podcasts, right? Particularly on that entertainment point, that you get engaged with the host, the entertainment that's provided, not just the content. And I find myself drifting away, as the listener is drifting away now from what we're talking.
Right, come on back, get back here.
Yeah, because I'm talking too much. From the podcast that I know I should listen to. The content is great, because it's really educational, but I don't jive with the host. It doesn't work for me. So I tend to then end up listening to something else instead, because, you know, we've only got a finite amount of attention, as you say. And so we're competing with that, and we need to be entertaining along the way. So that's a really good point.
I remember a quote from the CEO of Netflix. It says, "I'm not competing with other you know, streaming channels. I'm competing with sleep." Yeah. I was like, that's not a very nice thing to be competing with. Thank you for my insomnia.
Yeah. All right. So we're coming up to your 5th. What's the 5th one, mate?
Don't treat the platform like an advertising channel, but advertise. So everything we've been talking about so far, certainly points 2, 3, and 4 is you're telling stories, you're being educational, you're getting into conversations with these platforms, you know, on these platforms, blah, blah, blah. But frankly, if you don't advertise your entertaining educational content, you know, may get penalized. because the algorithms favor advertisers, and your buyer's organic search, or however they're going to, may put you below the gorillas in the market. And so, a couple examples, I took directly from the book is that Google embeds the names of top advertisers in your organic search string. So you don't know that, but if you're searching for camping equipment, don't be surprised if North Face or somebody else that's a heavy advertiser turns up, even though that was not necessarily a match with what you were asking for. And also, Google has been degrading search results to force users to kind of refine searches, which gives them more exposure to paid posts, which brings in more ad revenue to Google itself. So, the age-old practice, which I remember, is like, if you want to get your educational article in a trade print magazine, it's best if you're an advertiser. And I'm sorry if I'm showing my age, but that, that relationship, I remember. Well, it's because I was both the person writing some of the articles and managing the ad budget. But it was a combination that worked, and it wasn't that the content we were providing was, it was great for the audience, but it's just like, if we weren't an advertiser, it wouldn't necessarily get in the magazine. And it's just true today, but it's the algorithms that are making those choices, not the editorial department who's making that call. Which, as I would just wrap up by saying, so much, which is one of the points of the book is the Enshitication, but so much for the democratization of the internet that just was dispensed with a long time ago.
Oh my God! Now there's a rabbit hole, right? Is the fact that it is a commercial highway. It isn't the the super highway of information that was given.
Yes, the information super highway.
Yeah. It's now a commercial highway. It's now a toll road.
With lots of tolls.
Yeah. So, and I completely agree. So again, it's about recognizing that these firms are not providing community for us out of the goodness of their heart. It's pay to play these days. And I think a rabbit hole for another day. In fact, we've probably talked about this before, to your North Face example, apart from your point, which is really interesting, or the point from the book, which is that Google is putting North Face's thumb on the scale, right? Is the role of a brand in all of this, right? Because it is a multiplier in paid social media. Your ads perform better. People are more likely to look at your posts if they already trust you. So paid and performance marketing should be part of the overall marketing mix, which I think is a point we often make on this show, right? So,
it's actually, it's a good point for budget time, because you don't fall into the trap of like, we're just going to make our way with earned and free media. It's just not going to happen.
Oh my God. Yeah. I mean, organic is pretty much done, isn't it? It seems. So those are your 5 effing things this week. So number 1, have a plan and measurable goals, which is pretty much how we start every single show. No wonder people drift off. And number 2, be generous in sharing experience and expertise. Number 3, nurture your community, not just sell to them. Number 4, be entertaining. And number 5, advertise, because it's pay to play. So what song are we going with this week, Jeff?
Well, it's a good suggestion that you made. Pet Shop Boys has a song about on social media, how apropos, from 2019. And they say, it's so nice when people like you. If you're feeling #blessed, you're part of the conversation. It's like you've passed the test.
It's very poppy, that song. I mean, I don't know whether it's the finest of the Pet Shop Boys' work, but it's very poppy. But and there's a bit.
They wrote it just for this episode, I think.
Yeah. There's a bit of satire in there that keeps with the Enshitication phrase. But you picked out just the lyric that was positive about this. So thank you very much, Jeff. And I hope things are all good with you. I guess another couple of weeks until we see you again, and while you go and fight the good democracy fight you're getting on with. So I'll see you in a couple of weeks, mate.
Sounds good.
I'll see you then. Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Jeff. And that was a tiny bit of social media from the Pet Shop Boys. A lot to pack in there. And if you're not familiar with the topic of Enshitication and Corey Doctorow, he's a prolific speaker, so there's plenty on YouTube. And of course, I'll include links to that work in the show notes. Right, time to wind down into the weekend and join Robert Rose, chief troublemaker at Southern Bear, in our virtual bar, the Rose Rockstar, as I pick his brains over one of his classic cocktails.
Hello, my friend. Welcome to the bar.
Thank you very much, mate. And how are you doing?
I'm doing remarkably well. Nice. You know, it is another week, another dollar, as they say.
Yes.
So
Yes.
can't complain. My dance card is full, so I'm pretty happy.
Nice.
About it.
Well, I was actually going to congratulate you last week when we were chatting, because you're in league with a new group of people. Apart from all the other plates you have spinning, you're working with Big Valley Marketing. So congratulations.
I am.
On that.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
I have taken on a fractional role there, just as sort of their in-house content strategy guy.
Nice.
And they're a great agency run by some really smart and talented people, focusing in on PR and sort of full-on content and those sorts of things. And so I have basically, signed up as a fractional leader for them for when they have need of such thing, for their particular clients. Then I can be brought in as part of their team to help them level up their content strategy game. So it's been, and I get to work with one of my good friends that I've known for a million years. His name is Mike Weiss, who has been a friend of mine for a long time, and he's the head of content marketing strategy there. So it's as he said on his LinkedIn post, it's getting the band back together.
Oh my God, yeah! What a great partnership you two would make with any client. So that sounds fantastic. And yes, they might. And actually, I mean, congratulations to you, but congratulations to them as well. I think it's quite the coup to get you on board. So congratulations to that. And I think we should drink to that news, don't you?
Yeah. I like it. Yeah, let's have a cocktail. So we are tonight going to have what we call a rose petal lychee martini.
Wow.
So it's a fancy cocktail, and so it's basically going to be something that we shake and then pour into a martini glass. So it's going to have a few ingredients here, and basically what we're looking at here is so it's going to be a vodka drink, right? So if we look at that. And the question becomes, okay, how do you get the gin into the or vodka? You can do, and by the way, you can blend them. This is a really interesting one where you can actually blend the two together. So you blend, you either go full vodka, you can go gin if you want to, or you blend the two, blend of vodka and gin. And then what you're going to need are lychee syrup and or rose syrup. So those can be a little more difficult to find in your local bar haberdashery, as it were, but find those things. And sometimes they have a lychee rose syrup, which is also a combination of those things, but basically that's what you need. And then of course lemon. And basically you're going to do one part of all of those things into a shaker, and then you'll shake it over ice, and then you pour it and strain it, of course, into a coupe glass, martini glass. And then it will make a nice froth with with everything you're doing, and it is just a lovely, lovely, fancy. It's very fancy cocktail.
Sounds super fancy. I like that. And some ingredients that would take some finding, which makes it even more exotic. So how marvelous is that? Sounds delicious, my friend. Well, my question for you this week, as we sip on these cocktails, is I understand, well, we've chatted about this a couple of times when the microphone wasn't switched on, but we were talking about the fact that you've moved now, I think, from ChatGPT to Anthropic Claude, which I know is not big news and won't make the front page of Adweek, But what I'm interested in is how, because I know, knowing you, that this wasn't a decision of the moment. You probably did all the research and went through all the things and have tried all the tools. And I thought this would be a really interesting topic to share with the audience about how you went through with that. And I know that your move isn't related to Anthropic's relationship with the US government, but that's an interesting aside. It's a decision that you based on functionality. So talk us through your experimentation with all of the tools and why you settled for Anthropic Claude.
Yeah, and beyond that, I think there's a really interesting thing that I had learned. Like my big aha moment was after the move. And so basically there was two things that spurred the move. One is sort of, which has been news here in the US for sure, which is Anthropic's focus on safety, and sort of the way that they have very masterfully positioned themselves as, in the lead, as it were, on basically the user and generative AI focus, right? And I had heard anecdotally as well that people were valuing it better. And I had noticed myself that I was a pro user on ChatGPT, on OpenAI solution. And basically, I was noticing that the quality of ChatGPT had really gone down in the last version. And so that's anecdotal, of course. I don't have data to show that, but my experience with ChatGPT is that it has gotten worse over time, not better.
Yeah.
So I was sort of Claude curious, right? I was before I even began, and I'm also, by the way, a power user on Gemini as well. So the whole Gemini suite, right, including Flow, which is so I'm a pro, or they call it an ultra user on Gemini, which gets you access to Flow, which is the video creation stuff, and then the image stuff through Nano Banana, and then obviously Gemini, which is more of the classic text, sort of chat bot thing. And so, having said all of that, I am a heavy user of all three for the last 8 weeks, let's call it, almost 3 months, trying them out, playing with them, working with them. But historically, I had really used ChatGPT most heavily. And so the key was, hey, I wanted to move, right? I wanted to move to Anthropic. And so based on the fact that, I didn't want to spend, $600 a month, right, on 3 solutions where 2 would be plenty. So I knew I was going to keep Gemini, and I'll tell you why in a moment, but I knew I was going to keep that. But the question became, do I move from ChatGPT to Anthropic? And so I found all these how-tos online about moving. How do you move your sort of 3 years of chat history and all the stuff over to Anthropic? So I did all of that. And this was basically also just after Anthropic had launched Cowork and some of their sort of suite stuff that looks at, can look at everything like your folders on your desktop and do all sorts of very sophisticated stuff.
Wow, yeah.
So I did it. I went through the process of moving, and it's relatively straightforward. It's a relatively straightforward move. Here was my big aha moment, which is after working with all of them, they all 3 have very different use cases based on their core approach to how they work. And so very briefly, this is way too brief for something, really detailed, but just way too briefly, basically ChatGPT basically looks at all your chats, right, at a very surface level. So it remembers everything you've talked about with it pretty lightly. Yeah. And it also will separate projects. You can basically make projects that are focused chats around like a particular client or, your particular topic or whatever. And it also very lightly fences all of that in, right? So in other words, if you ask in another project about another project, it'll say, yeah, I know something about that. But because those things, the mesh between them is a little open, it will often hallucinate things, right? It'll, like in one project, it'll go, oh, you talked about this. Like, no, that was a different client, different project, different thing.
Yeah.
Same thing in their chats, right? It'll often, do those things basically. So the benefit of it is that it's sort of it's one place that kind of remembers you, right? But also tends to conflate things. And the quality like I said, had gone down. Right. Compare that to Gemini. Gemini doesn't really, they've got the idea of gems, but it doesn't really separate things. It basically is meant to be sort of completely ambient. It basically, you just have chats and it remembers everything about every chat you've ever had.
Wow, right.
And over time, it really does get to know you. So it's like every chat you ever have, it basically sort of remembers stuff about you. But there's no real segmentation of where you segment. You don't segment anything off. And then finally, the difference on Anthropic, on Claude, is that everything is kept separate. Like your projects are literally individual rooms you can think where basically the only thing it knows is what you talk about in that room, right? Those are projects. And then every chat is kind of separate from it. Like it knows in a stored memory, and it will remember across some stored chats some of the things that you tell it to remember, but pretty much every chat is separate too.
Right.
So what that does is that it's a subtle but really important difference in the way that your use case works.
Yeah.
So what I'm finding now, and this was my big aha moment, is like, oh, Anthropic is fantastic for me. It's much better than ChatGPT because I typically use AI tools to work on very specific projects. Right. And, whether it's a writing project or whether it's a client project or whether it's a financial analysis project or whatever, so Cowork and Anthropic is perfect for me because I can connect it literally to a folder on my desktop and have it use my entire client folder for that project and blah, 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 blah. Right. Gemini is great because it's got the things that I need for video and for imagery. And otherwise is just a great technical partner because it knows that, what I do is I use it for anything where I need technical help. Like, oh, how do I configure a router? Or how do I do this? Or how do I do that? Right? Because it remembers everything about me. So it goes, oh, I know that you have this set up as your network, blah, blah, blah. But it's stuff that I don't really care about. It becomes more of a, like, how do I do shit? Right? And then I have no use anymore for ChatGPT. So I've completely moved. But what I recognized was that there are a lot of people out there that they're thinking, oh, I can just move over to Claude and it'll behave just like a different version of ChatGPT. And I'm going, no, it won't. Like if you're using ChatGPT as sort of your little fun guide to help you plan your vacation and do all those kinds of things, it's not going to be what you think it is. You're going to have to approach your use case in a much different way. So for those consumer users, I think it's going to be a little bit of a pain point, right? In terms of how to move and where to move. And I think it's just a really interesting topic.
Yeah. I had a couple of thoughts on this because you were talking about moving, and I was wondering about the connection one has with these tools because I'm a ChatGPT paid user. And I don't pay for all of them. And in fact, the annoying thing about Gemini is because I have a Google Workspace account and I have 9 emails on it, I would have to buy everybody Gemini in my family and in my business, right? So it's like, I can't do that. So I wish that Google would figure that shit out. But anyway, that doesn't matter. Because for audio, as you say, for images and for video, I think the Gemini is fantastic. But you form an attachment. I don't want to say this out loud, but you kind of form an attachment. Like I feel like ChatGPT, I don't want to say knows me. I don't like where I'm going with this, but it does say, oh, this is very Tuesday 2 cents, or this is very Velocity B, whatever I'm working on, right? You're absolutely right. The barriers between those things are porous, but I get the feeling that I've trained something, right? And for me to split up with it and go to Claude, I would need to teach Claude all these things again. Did you feel any sense of that?
Yeah, no, I think that there's that recognition, and then there's also the recognition that it has trained you.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You know what I mean?
Not to leave it.
Yeah. I mean, the systems train us too, right? On how to interact with it. We are,
True.
what is it? What is the? We are shaped by our tools. And then our tools. We shape the tools, and then our tools shape us. But it has in many ways trained us how to interact with it. This is the whole. You get everybody out there going, well, you need to be a prompt engineer, and you need to have, you need to spend a really good amount of time getting your prompt and, teaching your, basically telling your AI that, they're an expert in marketing before you get a marketing strategy. It's like, okay, no, you don't need to do that, but okay, fine, do that, right? So it's trained us on how to have the relationship with the platform as well.
I'm feeling like I'm ChatGPT's bitch now.
Yeah.
It's got me. But so you felt a little, was there any, so it's interesting to hear how these things work differently. And it sounds interesting that, so Claude now does everything for you that ChatGPT did, basically, right? That's where, I mean, it seems that Google is a different use case for you, but is that
it's changed my workflow. That's the thing.
Wow.
Right?
Okay.
And so it, we're kind of laughing about it, but it is true in the sense that I had to rethink how I interact with my with that as a core focus, right? Because with ChatGPT, I had set up all these custom GPTs for various things, and then I had set up projects that were, the custom GPTs were things that like had a process to them, like step 1, step 2, step 3, and interview me or do that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then my projects were sort of ways that I kept things walled off and organized in terms of the way that I worked. So Claude has that same thing, but I have to remember that it's okay. If it's in a project, it literally won't get inside those walls, right? So I can't ask Claude about a project outside of the project itself. And so it's a subtle difference, but it's an important one because it changes the way that it changes your relationship, right? It changes your relationship with the tool. And I don't think there's enough, I mean, there's probably somebody out there talking about this, but I don't think there's enough people out there talking about how those differences, and the funny thing is, I actually asked Claude about this. And I said, and Gemini, by the way, about this. And they were like, yeah, well, it's it's a different way that each of the companies approaches AI, like philosophically, right? Google wants you to use Gemini as your sort of co-pilot and assistant, right? It wants you to be basically your assistant that knows everything about you and spiders your email and knows what you're doing, and sort of more ambient level AI. And then Claude Cowork, basically wants to be your project partner. Like it wants to be your work partner to do very specific projects with, whether that's coding or writing or research or whatever you're doing, and basically separate things very, very much into your own private little world. And ChatGPT is kind of trying to be your friend, basically.
Yeah. And there's one missing. Well, there's a couple of missing names from your list. One of them, which we've already discussed, which is that because you said the word Copilot, and I think we believe that Microsoft Copilot is absolutely,
well, that's just a ridiculous tool.
Rubbish anyway, right? So we won't talk about that one. Yeah. What about Perplexity? Did you look at Perplexity?
Perplexity is a search engine as far as I'm concerned. It's pretty good at that, but I haven't had any luck. I mean, and perhaps it's me, right? That basically, it very well could be that I'm the issue, but I have not enjoyed my Perplexity experiences.
Right. Cool. So it's between Claude and ChatGPT.
But by the way, I haven't messed around with Meta either, and I also haven't messed around with the DeepSeek, and I haven't messed around with the 900 other LLMs that you can install on your laptop. I mean, it's like I'm no Chris Penn, right? I'm not out there. Right. I don't want to be reporting myself, which is kind of the point, right? So few of us are Chris Penn out there, sort of testing every one of these LLMs for pressure testing and that sort of thing. We're just consumers trying to get the best we can, and we're not experts. And what I found is that the use cases are different. And so, but they tend to be presented as like, oh, it's going to be just your assistant. It's like, yes, it is, but like it's a different, once you get like to your very valid point, once you get a relationship with one of them, moving to that different use case is not a small thing.
Right. Yeah. And to continue with my less cerebral observations to yours, I was wondering whether the robot assistant that we choose will be a bit like, whether you're a Mac person, a Windows person, or a Linux person, right? It'll be part of the definition of your personality. Oh, I see. You're a ChatGPT person, are you? And that'll define you in your social group. So I don't know whether we need to be careful about. Do you think we're starting to form that? Do you think that'll define our class?
Do you mean do you mean that we have to should be thinking about this move or?
It was more like whether the robot that we choose will define us. Like I'm a Mac person, right? And that's a tag, isn't it?
I think 100%. No. I think that's really true. I think you're right. Yeah. I think the relationships. I mean, look, there's also the status thing, right? Which is Mac people used to be insufferable, right? Because they would walk around talking about how I'm a Mac person, and you poor Windows people are just idiots, right? You know, and vice versa. By the way, the Windows people used to run around with their sort of that whole religious war that happened in the 2008, 2007, the mid 2000s there, with Justin Long and the ads, I'm a Mac, I'm a PC, all that.
Yeah.
I think we're absolutely will get to that sort of element of, using one over the other will be a status idea and, or to your point, will be personality based.
And it's part of the brand, isn't it? The whole Windows versus Mac thing was partially brand driven, right? So these LLMs presumably will start to develop their brands.
I mean, you can even see it a little bit today. It's like even if I mean, I'm overstating this, so just to make the point, but you can see it a little bit today. It's like if you say you're on ChatGPT, it's like, oh, you're a consumer, right? You're just a you're just a
Windows guy.
If you're on Claude, you're one of the cool kids, right? And if you use Gemini, you're probably just a geek, right? It's like
I love it, man. So if I'm looking to associate myself with a brand to improve the way I'm going to feel, where am I going to read content?
You really jumped. You really worked for that one.
I worked that hard. Where am I going to go for that, mate?
Why don't you hit me up? I am. LinkedIn is probably the best place for this because this is where I'm talking about this kind of stuff. That's not because this isn't really this is outside my business at all. So just connect with me on LinkedIn and
nice.
Where I try and offer up this in my newsletter called Lens, which I send out every week or try to send out every week, which is my Substack.
Nice. And that's seventhbearlens.substack.com.
Thank you very much. Yeah, you remembered it and I didn't even. Yeah.
And also, about 150 times I've said at the end of this podcast, where am I going to, where can the listeners find you when they spin the dial on the internet? So I can't do that because you just told us. But will you be in the bar next week, mate?
I will definitely be in the bar next week.
I'll see you then, mate. Cheers. Thank you, Robert. It was really interesting chatting about the little differences between the LLMs and getting his perspective as he's so deep into this stuff. Hope you found it helpful. So that's a wrap on episode 314 of the Rockstar CMO effing marketing podcast. I've been your host, Ian Truscott, and thank you for putting a dime into your podcasting jukebox, selecting our track and jiving along with us. You can find links to me, Jeff and Robert in the show notes and the articles we discussed, along with links to our blog, newsletter, and all of our previous episodes at rockstarcmo.com. Next week, I have a very special guest episode as I chat with the founders of The Slice, a community of fractional marketers, to get their take on the world of fractional CMOs. And Robert is back in the bar. And in the meantime, I'll leave you with this quote from Corey, Dr. Rowe: conversation is king, content is just something to talk about.
This podcast is heard along the Marketing Podcast Network. For more great marketing podcasts, visit marketingpodcasts.net.